So maybe we'll reconvene as a board. So I think this is the first time we've ended a session even a few minutes early, which is nice. So I guess I just would like to welcome any comments of the board about, some people, this is their first meeting, about anything that we've talked about this season or today. If they want to just kind of put some thoughts out on the table, if they just want to try to make some arguments for the other members of the board, I would welcome that first.
Very enlightening information. I think that...
Sorry, Mike.
Yeah, turn on your mic, thanks.
Sorry, very enlightening information. I like Tim's presentation just historically, just how it met with some of the other numbers that I had not seen before, and just that debate about whether or not, how do you deal with it. And I asked him particularly, how do you deal with that, with the fact that we've had 2 years of freeze, right? And was that the previous 2 years, or when was the freezes?
Last year it was small. There was a small increase.
Okay.
Two years of small increases.
2 years of small increases,
And then prior to that, then 2 freezes.
Yes.
So-
a one-year lease freezes.
One year, and then the
Yeah, there was an increase on 2-year leases
Okay. But,
of 2%.
Right. So the question here is, how do you make sure that we pay attention to what he's saying, because I think he had some legitimate points there, and yet not risk, putting any stress on landlords. But then there's also the question that no one seems to have an open book question on profitability, right? And yet maybe the fact that how many of our buildings are being, rent stabilized are turning over? How many are turning over? Because every time you see one turning over, it's the fact that I'm thinking of baseball teams and basketball teams that they don't want to open their books to the player association, but yet when they sell their franchises, it's billions of dollars. So you're making a bit the same way you sell these buildings. Somebody's buying them to go to a bank. You have to be making a profit. And not only a profit,
Yeah.
you have to. So, just all of that information. I'm kind of taking it in now and saying, how do I balance all of that?
I think though, on the opening the books, a lot of the resistance is it is not means tested housing, and the purpose of rent stabilization was to, if the market fluctuates between 2% and 10%. In the market rate housing, that the rent stabilized tenant wouldn't get a 10% increase one year and a 2% increase one year and a 5% increase the next year, that those would be smoothed. I mean, that is a lot of the thinking behind, that they would take the increase over longer periods of time, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the landlord criticisms, without having means test, you're saying landlords open their books. We don't know a tenant population who is presenting what their affordability is, or does the unit type they're living in meet their housing needs? I mean, we all want a bigger apartment, but, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. I would love to have a 2-bedroom apartment, but I can't afford a 2-bedroom apartment. So, I have to do what I have to do. So, it's not testing for unit size either, the way a truly subsidized program would size the unit with the occupant and the rent.
Fair.
Well, I'm sorry, you were going to speak.
Oh, no, I just, and maybe, I really liked Tim Collins' testimony, but I assume that he's made some of these similar recommendations in previous years, and I wanted to hear how the board and staff have addressed them or not.
It's you, Andrew.
You mean in terms of those 3 different things that he recommended? I think last year was the first year he talked about sales price. Actually, I'm not even sure he did last year.
I don't think he did.
No, but he did
new.
mention aging of the building last year. The problem with that is to follow a whole group, a set of buildings that have been sold and throughout the years and see where those buildings have come. So that's the trick there. And then the other item of the addressing some ornaments, we've had some conversations with finance recently, trying to figure out what we can do. Finance is at a point with the data they collect from the RPIE, because the compliance has gone up so much. I think 90% or so of owners comply to the RPIE. It's a high, 92%, I think is what he said when he was here last. That they're taking the data and they're establishing norms for their assessment purposes. That's what the data is for. So they'll have an idea of what, a sixth-floor walk-up would be in a particular neighborhood because they have a certain amount of data for those type of buildings. Thousands of units. So if they see an outlier and they go above the 90th percentile or below the 10 percentile, they'll adjust the assessment based on what everybody else is reporting. So that's how they manage it. So the idea of doing an audit is not something they would necessarily do in a situation where a building is over-reporting expenses or under. What they may do is look into expenses in a particular building. In 1 year, they see a jump. They may research that, talk to the owner, do a review of what's going on in that particular building to make sure that that owner is reporting that expense for whatever it is. And so that's what they do. I don't know, the traditional audit that they used to do, I don't think it's a practice they normally take anymore. And because of what they use the RPIE data for. With that said, we use it for something else, and that.
I think that the context that's important is when the audit was done, the computerization of all these systems. We have kind of gone light years ahead, and I think are they going to come in and speak the DOF?
If you have a specific thing, and they've been the last couple of years, so I didn't think to invite them this year.
Just
but
because we have so many new people. His
we'd
presentation's
have to have a
helpful.
topic for them to come and
I
speak
see.
to, I guess.
But he
which we can
talked
go
about-
back and I could give you their testimony from previous years and circulate that, and we could look at
Or
they're
the
up
video,
online.
maybe if you circulate the video link to it, because I think what's
Okay.
helpful about his testimony is the amount of data they're getting and the kind of modeling they can do from the data is just something that wouldn't have occurred. I don't want to say it wouldn't have occurred 10 years ago, but it definitely did not occur at the date of the audit. So there's just much more big data and ability to look at that data in a systematic way than there ever existed before. So if you see the video testimony, which we probably can pull up, he
They're there.
talks pretty extensively about their confidence in the data because, as Andrew said, there's so many data points. So if one person has whatever, I don't know what the expense is, if they have heat, right? So we know the weather was the same for all the buildings, whether your building is well insulated or not well insulated. They have thousands of examples of what the heat costs per unit. And so they can see these ones that don't align.
So Scott, why do you think, because I think this has been pretty consistent in the last 2 years, why do you think the owners have also critiqued the staff for their audit-adjusted figures?
Well, I think the owners criticize it because of the footnote of the reducing of the 8%, is that what it says in there? That the audit makes it so you need to reduce everything to 8% to make it real. And I think that owners feel, similarly to DOF, that there is so much data and so much ability to analyze the data in a way that there wasn't previously.
That it's not understated
That
anymore.
it probably, the 8% is either non-existent or a tiny, tiny fraction. So that the 8% is somewhat harmful to the
The
story.
only thing I will say is, bear in mind, the 8% is used in cost to income and cost to rent ratios. It's not used when we determine NOI. So we're not using audited expenses then. So really the only place we see in those ratios, and we do include the unaudited ratios in the report now, simply because of the length of time. So I don't know if somewhere that lies a more true ratio or not, somewhere in between those two numbers. I mean, finance did admit there are people who report their expenses, and we get the raw data, and not, as Scott would say, necessarily, there could be an anomaly in that building for that particular year or whatever, but we're getting the raw data. We don't get the data once they schmooze it out, so.
Also, Tim asked everybody to consider the sales price. I think the sales price of a building is completely irrelevant because when people are buying buildings, they're not necessarily buying it for the rent-stabilized rent roll. They're buying it for the exempt units in the building. They're buying it because maybe they want to co-op the building. They're buying it because they think that's the next hot area and they want to buy. Most of the people that are buying are not buying for the rent-stabilized rent roll. So, and I
But,
think,
but if I'm the bank, right, I'm not worried about the buyer or seller. If I'm the bank, I'm giving you the loan based on this.
on the total rent roll, you're giving it on the total
Right.
rent roll, not just on the rent stabilized rent roll.
How many,
Patty, I'm sorry, can you use the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's yeah, that one or the one to the, either one.
how many of our buildings right now have really many, like 50/50 rent unstable, you know, how much of the unregulated apartments are swinging some of that logic, you know what I mean?
Oh, a
You know, no.
tremendous amount.
Okay, well, depending where it is.
We
Depending on
did,
the area.
yeah, we did a memo we can circulate last year that looked at I&E data by buildings that had 20% of the units were stabilized, 50 and 80. So in general, statement, you leave core Manhattan, and you look at the I&E report, most of those units, buildings are going to have 80% or more stabilized.
Or more.
Or more. In general. I mean, there's some pockets of Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx that are deregulating, but 80% of the deregulation has happened in Manhattan. So if you look at the outer, you know, those other boroughs, you get a better picture of.
And if you make it.
And that's what we found from that memo essentially, is that that was the case. I can circulate that again, but you can point to those particular
I'd
boroughs.
almost, if you say 80% of them are in a certain sector of Manhattan, below 96th Street probably, or something like that.
It's mostly, I mean, we don't have the exact data, but yeah, it would be more core Manhattan, which we define as below 96th Street on the east side and
West
below
side,
110th on the west.
side.
Yeah.
If that's 80, if you take downtown Brooklyn or those zones of Brooklyn and throw that into Manhattan, that's going to move that number up. You know, in other words, the concentration of what downtown Brooklyn pretty much is almost a piece of Manhattan in one sense of real estate. So if you then look at that, that would even weigh that more to what you're saying, that well, you know, their interest is how much are there, if buildings are turning over to a certain degree in certain buildings you're looking at in core areas of the Bronx, they're not going to be not even close to 20% deregulated.
Right, but they're also up and coming, and owners are buying for what's going to be for the future, not necessarily.
I'm going to agree with you there, but I'm just going with what the bank is lending you on. The bank is not lending you on what you're thinking.
I'm not saying they're losing money, but I also don't think that owners should only be even. They're in business to make money.
No. There's no disagreement there.
Let me put it a different way. There are different motivations to buy a property or to assess it. One is, based on him, it's like a cap rate, which you apply to the net operating income to get a sense of the value of the property. That's one way of measuring value, but if you think a property is going to appreciate, it'd be deregulated, people sometimes will value a price differently based on the expected capital gain down the road. Stuyvesant Town is a great example of it. It was priced way above the rent roll because they thought they would make a killing with deregulation and conversion.
And the J51 case came out.
So it varies how you value. And I wasn't quite clear on, I think in a general sense, on giving data on the sales prices of rent-regulated or mixed rent-regulated, non-market rate units would be valuable. We have a little bit in the mortgage survey report, but it's not very, it's very rough. It's just, ranges. But how you interpret sales price is not quite as straightforward as I think he suggested. One question I had about the audit. So Tim was saying that landlords, many of them will over-report their expenses, under-report their income, and he's saying if you had an audit, you'd have a better sense of the actual data, and I guess you're saying that with the better, the more complete data in the finance report, in the income and expense reports, that's less likely to be the case than he argues?
Yeah, so in recent years, they've redone the form. It's out now, a digital filing, and they are much more specific about what owners cannot include. Probably up to about 2010, 2011, there was, owners were putting things into expense, particularly in miscellaneous that weren't O&M type of costs. There's only now 5, I think, on the worksheet. There's like 5 different items that can go into miscellaneous. And then they list all these things that are not O&M. It's a list of like 80 or 90 expenses that you can't put in miscellaneous. So there's been improvement there, clearly, because just clarification.
Although, to be clear, don't owners argue that some things that should be counted as expenses are not allowed, and that's not fair?
Yeah, they do, and maybe they put them in. I don't know, so with any type of reporting, it's never perfect, no matter what. Do I feel, I get a sense that it's better than it's been? I do get that sense, and that's coming from the testimony of Department of Finance and the efforts they've made to improve their data. So that's kind of where we stand with all that. But they have definitely, I think, certainly clarified what you can and can't. That's pretty clear now.
Other comments from the board about substance?
I think, going back to the last time we met, I'm not sure if I actually just missed this, but were you able to circulate the percentage and total number of rent-regulated 421A units?
Yeah, we have that.
Yeah, we,
Did we not?
or just pointing to
Is
me,
it-
pointing to me where that can be clearly found.
It would be in the, it will be in the, I'm sorry, it's in the next report. Oh,
Oh,
it's in the housing supply report. Yeah.
okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Which
Great.
will be out on May 16th.
Oh,
But
okay.
if you really want, we could try to, I don't know where we are with all that data yet. So
Okay. Okay.
but it will be a part
Happy
of
to
it.
wait
It's always
till
a part of that report, yeah.
Got it.
It,
So it's, yeah.
Not a quarter of the market.
Yep, okay. That's
yeah, I
helpful.
mean, I think that it's about 90% of the units are 421A units. I mean, 90,000, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
Right, okay, I was like.
90,000 out of,
Okay.
900,000 that register,
Less than 10%.
or 966,000 the HVS counts, so it's 10% or less.
Got it. And then my other question was about circulating the formula that you,
Oh, right.
staff used to
Yes, we can.
calculate.
Only if you'd speak into your mic, then I can answer.
So people understand the 421A landscape. So when we count a 421A apartment, obviously there's 421A buildings that do have deep skew affordability in them. So in that 421A number, if there's a low-income tax credit unit, is it counted? I guess it is, right? Because it's in that building.
Counted as rent regulated?
Well, no, but counted as a 421A unit. I'm saying there is sometimes some debate about, the 421A units are all $5,000 a month, which, yes, there are some, but there's, in most of those buildings, 20% of the apartments have pretty deep affordability, and in some cases now with the new housing codes, it's 25 and 30 and 35%, so there's higher thresholds. So when we think about that number, I think we also have to think, if we say it's 90,000, there's at least 170,000 in there, or 70,000 that are probably affordable. So just to,
I guess my reason for wanting to get a better grasp on the percentage or total 421A units is using that as a proxy for rent-regulated units that are closer to market rate. So accounting for LIHTC or other deeper affordability, and having that split apart would be helpful.
Could you just explain that again? I'm just not sure I just want to understand how you're going to use that information.
For me personally, it's an imperfect proxy for rent-stabilized units that are closer to market rate, or essentially that aren't serving very low-income New Yorkers.
The non-LIHTC units,
The 428 units that are non-LIHTC.
Got it.
So if LIHTC units or units with deeper affordability are included in that overall 421A number, being able to understand, how.
Splitting it
yeah,
out.
that
Yeah.
would be helpful.
The only thing I had a question was in the Ms. Mayornova's, we
Yeah.
got into a discussion about major capital improvements. How many of the units that we're, going to be, dealing with increasing the rents are affected by major capital improvements?
We ask that question to HCR every year, and they never give us an answer for the number of units. I don't know. You know, and they're,
Because I mean, it just my own sense.
right. It's a kind of a difficult thing, because even if you track in a current year how many have gotten an MCI increase, you sort of have to look at it over time, because they could have gotten another MCI increase 2 or 3 years ago. So it's not, you can't just sort of take a snapshot to know. You can maybe say, okay, at X amount of units where there was an approval.
Yeah. Man.
So,
I asked the question because I had a colleague
it's,
who I told that, I'm
it's
on the board.
hard to
And
say. I mean, we do have
she
individual.
immediately said, oh, and she
Bless
came
you.
to complain to me and said, I've gotten, and I said, I don't know, I don't think MCI, and she goes, that she had like 3 MCI increases.
Yeah.
And I'm like looking at her and goes, and I looked at her, she's a single mom, and like, oh, wow, when I vote for a rent increase in here, I don't have nothing to do with that.
Just so you know, MCIs are collected based on the rent the tenant's paying, and you can only increase it a certain percentage each year. So even if the MCI grant is let's say it's $10 per room per month, let's just say that's what it is. You don't necessarily get that. It depends on what the tenant's rent is and what the rent was when you applied for the application. So you can only collect a certain amount each year, and it only goes up a certain amount each year. It doesn't go up the $30 per month each year. It takes a very long time for it to go into the rent.
So that's a cap, that, you're saying that
There's a
$10
cap.
per room is a cap?
No. I'm saying if that particular MCI, let's say you did, I don't know, new roof and new boiler and whatever it is you did to the building, let's say it came out to that it should be $10 per room per month.
You may not be able to collect.
You
Collect
can't
the-
necessarily collect it.
From this one you could, but from that one you couldn't, depending on who,
No,
what
you
rent.
might
what
not
rent.
be able to from any of them, depending on what your rent is, what the rent was for that apartment
That's what I mean.
when the application was filed.
Well, what I'm saying is that in the same building, you might get it from some apartments, and you might not get it
Yes,
from another.
that's correct.
And
That's
what if you got 2, let's say you did the roof and the boiler? got
Still,
2.
there's a 6% cap per year that you can charge.
So let's say one of them, it was $10, you could only get 6%, right? And then and another one was another $10. You're not gonna get any more than just the.
Correct.
And that's
correct.
it, even though you got a double, another
That's
MCI,
correct.
you're just gonna get the first one, it's not, you're
It
not.
could take years to that second one to go into.
So your increase, you get that percentage, and then the next year you can get another percentage on getting to the max.
Yes.
So every year you get a bit of trying to
Yes.
catch that. So, okay.
Anything else on substance? All right, so let's just talk about some process things, and this is particularly for the new members. So let's just look, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if you look in your folders, there's language for the preliminary vote. There are proposed guidelines for the apartment and loft order. Hotel apartment and loft order 51, and then the hotel order number 49.
There's 2 proposals.
Proposal 51 and 49.
I think it was put before the memos in your folder, I don't know. Yeah, it's probably on the other side there, Alex, somewhere.
49 and 51, I got it.
The hotel, maybe. There's the hotel one. Okay, all right. So, for some of this folks, it's review, but for the newer members. So, on May 7th, what we're doing is the board has to adopt preliminary guidelines. So, the meeting will begin with David reading in the order into the record. So for the apartment and loft, it would be the language of the proposed order, leaving what the board will determine that evening blank. And what the board members will do is put forth what they believe are, what the proposed guidelines should be. So if
Who's going first this year? I can't remember where we are in the sequence.
Yeah, I'll have to look. That's up to the new chair, so we got to figure out how he wants to do it. If historically, I never
We'll do
discussed
whatever
him.
we didn't do last year. We'll switch.
Okay. Historically, we've given a chance for tenants and owners to put proposals forward to hear their side, and then take proposals from public members. So somebody will put forth, David will recognize that person, they'll put forth a proposed guideline, whatever it may be. Dave will bring it to a vote. You need 5 yeses for it to pass. In recent years, and those are part of the charts that I sent around that are in your folders from the last meeting, there's been a range proposed. Last year, for example, it was a range for one-year leases of 0.75% to 2.75%, and then for a 2-year lease, I believe it was 1.75% to 3.75%. The idea behind giving a range in recent years is that we're not done with the process. We have public hearings to hear from, we have more data to consider, but it gives a range, a small enough range for people to be able to publicly comment on it. It doesn't mean that we can't give a single number, and we've, prior to, I want to say it was about 2007 or 8, that's what it was. It was a single percentage number that was given. It's almost always been a percentage. In certain years, there's been other things added, like a minimum rent requirement, or there was a sort of a longevity increase done in 08 and 09, where if the tenant was in place 8 years or more, the owner could take a minimum increase of $45 or 4.5%, or I should say a fixed dollar amount of $45 or a percentage of 4.5% for a 1-year lease. A 2-year lease was 8.5% or $85. Basically, the cutoff was 1,000. So anything above 1,000, the owner would most likely take the percentage, and anything below was 5. So it isn't always a straight percentage, but so that's the first. That's the guideline we have to vote on. If you follow down along in recent years, or not recent, but since 1997, the vacancy allowance is set by state law. So the board has not done anything above what the state law has had, and there's language in the current order that basically states that no vacancy allowance is allowed except as what is by law, and that's been...
I have a question about that. Since that's an issue this year, whether there will be a vacancy allowance anymore, could we pick a number in case that's kicked out?
I don't know if you can pick a number if that's kicked out. When we do a final vote, you could present a number, because in theory, we should know what happened.
Should know by June 15th, but I'm not sure.
Well, I wouldn't say June 15th. They always go past that, but we are voting on the 25th. It's rare they've ever gone more than like 6 days past, so we do have a sense of what's going on. If there is some concern about that, we could mention it. In some years, we've just talked about it at the preliminary, where we may say there's no vacancy allowance, but we do want to hear testimony from folks who are coming to consider whether a vacancy allowance should be considered this year. We've done things like that. If it's not in that order, we recommend that, even though we're setting this vacancy allowance as what's by state law, we want to hear testimony regarding that.
So when Chip and RSA testified today, are they going to be allowed to speak to that?
Yeah, they can, yeah, absolutely, and at any public hearing, they could speak to that. So.
Can we just break that down? I just want to make sure I fully understand. Could we just break down the vacancy allowance and what we expect is going to happen in Albany? Could someone just put step by step?
One of the proposals, right now, it's 20% if you get a 2-year vacancy, and then the 1 year is the difference between the 1-year guideline and the 2-year guideline subtracted from the 20%. But there is talk that will be taken out, and that there will not be a state vacancy number.
Right.
Which then would bring us back to owners should get some vacancy allowance, and then that would be in our hands.
And in the past, historically, we've said zero. What do we said?
Well, since 97, we basically said there is no vacancy allowance by this order except what's allowed by the state law. That's what the order says now. So
And prior to that?
Prior to that, we had set vacancy allowances. So it was 5%. Sometimes it depended. In certain years, it could be, 5% for everyone. We can say if there hasn't been a certain vacancy taken since a certain order number, if the apartment hasn't had one, then they can take one. Like right now, the difference
The
in the
long-term
vacancy.
vacancy bonus now, if you hadn't taken one in the last 8 years, there's a calculation how to, no, 20% is you get that, but there's an additional vacancy bonus now if you haven't had a vacancy in more than 8 years. That's
On top of, it's one, I thought it was 10, it's 8 years or 10 years? I thought it was,
8
whatever,
years.
either. It's 0.6% of what, so if somebody was in an apartment for 10 years, they vacate, not only can the owner get the 20%, but they can get an additional 6% because they've been there
It's-
8 years or more, and
Yeah,
it's how many
it's not
years they were
6%.
there.
And then not our, no, that replaces the whatever percent increase that we would normally give for.
Well, we have, no, there is no renewal lease taken at all. It's just on a vacancy lease, it's the vacancy allowance. Our renewal adjustments don't get applied to vacancy leases. There are some little changes since 2015. If there was the vacancy rate was stratified depending on the last vacancy, so there were some changes in 2015.
Yeah, if there's a preferential rent.
within 1 year, you can't-
You can't get 20%, you could only get 5% if it was within the last.
There were other
Yeah,
things
there's a
added.
range.
All right,
So I guess the important point is if we do something in the preliminary that's different from the final, we do want to hear public comment on it if we can. But if we say there is no vacancy allowance, it doesn't mean in the final that we could set some sort of vacancy allowance, but it would probably can't be something like 50% vacancy. It would have to be a reasonable number that wouldn't be challenged, that, it was sort of an arbitrary, excessive increase that folks could not comment on. So that's why we sort of at the vote want to say that even though a vacancy allowance is, we do want to hear public comment about a vacancy allowance, if that's where the board wants to go. What's in the preliminary, it's preliminary. Vacancy allowance affects about 10% of the units that turn over in a course of a guideline period. So we are impacting a certain percentage of the units. So currently, there is no vacancy allowance, so we can keep that language, you can change whatever the proposal passes. Now, there's the sublet allowance that we've done for quite some time now. It's probably the last 15 to 20 years. I'd have to go back to the chart to look. But essentially, if it's a 10% sublet allowance to owners when a tenant sublets their apartment, the owner can charge an additional 10%. That sort of comes from the fact that tenants could charge a 10% increase on subletting the apartment if the apartment's furnished. So that's sort of where that derived historically. So if the tenant can get a 10%, the board has felt that because of the administrative fees and how it works with a sublet, that there should be some bump in rent for the owner in a sublet situation. So that's been 10%. It's always been 10% since that has come into effect. Are we required by law to set a sublet allowance? No. Are we required by law for a vacancy allowance? No. What we are required by law is setting 1 and 2 year lease renewal adjustments for apartments, 1 and 2 year lease renewal adjustments for lofts, which is next. And we are responsible for setting a special guideline from rent control when apartments go from rent control and the rent stabilization. Those are the 3 areas that we have to
I have
do.
one question. Before there was a state vacancy allowance, weren't you also required to set one?
No,
Oh, it was up to the board.
it's up to the board, yes. In some years we did, some years we did. We didn't always
Almost every year
say.
had a vacancy.
Yeah, most every year had a vacancy.
Do we, in one of our reports, do we have a historical list of vacancy bumps?
Yes, sure, it's on, if you look at the rent guideline board chart, it's on the chart.
Okay, okay.
Just go down in the vacancy column.
There's a
Okay.
chart on our board, the historic of all the guidelines. I could circulate that chart too.
Just
It's in the
hypothetically,
initial
do the
material
owner
that I
reps,
gave you,
are
that
they
binder
thinking
and
of
stuff.
a number for the vacancy allowance?
Yes, absolutely.
In your proposal, but what, I mean, I'm not asking you to put it on the table right now, but,
Yeah, there's definitely.
okay.
just for clarification, what is the allowance for vacancy, in the situation you mentioned before, for tenants who've been in the apartment for more than 8 or 10 years? Well,
So if you live in your apartment 10 years and you vacate and I move in, if I sign a 2-year lease, it's currently at 20%, the rent gets bumped 20%, plus there's a vacancy bonus, which you would take your last rent, let's say your last rent was, I don't know, $500. It would be multiplied by 6% times the amount of years that, times the amount of years since the, I think since the last vacancy, I believe. I have to look it up.
okay. That would just be helpful. I wasn't aware of that bonus. And that applies only for you, tenants who've been in the unit for more than 8 years?
Yes.
Okay.
But then it would be reduced if you were paying a preferential rent. It wouldn't be 20%.
Okay.
And also, if you're paying, I think it's $300 is an additional amount that it goes up to a fixed dollar amount before the vacancy kicks in. And if you were paying $500 or less, there's another adjustment too. Which is, that's very low rents. That's very unusual for that being taken. So that's the the apartment side of it. And just quickly, the hotel order, we simply have to do renewal lease. They're not lease because they don't necessarily have a lease in some instances, but we call them rent adjustments. There are no 2-year, there are only 1-year rent adjustments in the hotel. And we have stated there is no vacancy allowance for new tenancies. Again, that's something that if something wanted to be added there, we certainly could do that for vacancies for hotels. There's argument of whether the current law covers hotels units with the vacancy allowance. There's been some cases that have said yes, but the law seems to say no. So we have had testimony where some tenants have seen vacancy allowance, that 20% given to hotel folks. Anyway, so we can talk about doing a vacancy allowance as part of a proposal there. And that's the hotel side. So what we need to do for the hotel is simply by law, we have to promulgate those 1-year lease adjustments for the 5 different classes of hotels. So that's what we need to do at the preliminary. Generally, we can start with either the hotel, or in recent years, we started with a hotel order. It's up to how, Dave, I should explain, step back, chair has, sets the agenda, so he can set the order of business essentially at a meeting. This is his first go-around, so we haven't had a discussion about what's been done historically and what he feels that he wants to do. He may take apartments first and hotels. I don't know. But that is set by David. Unless there's any questions, those are the proposed.
When do you need it? What's our timeline?
In terms of,
Submitting.
oh no, I don't need them. That's the final vote. Yeah, we can just, the night of, you can just propose whatever you want to propose because it's the preliminary guideline. When it comes to the final, a new law was passed. It's not new, a local law was passed 5 years ago, thanks to the Taxi and Limousine Commission. What they would do is they would talk and discuss what they were going to do, and then when a meeting would come and they would vote on something completely different. To the point where the city council made a law saying that you have to make public what you're voting on 72 hours prior to what you're going to vote on. It has to be put on the website and circulated to the board members, not including Sunday. So that has to be done for the final vote. So anything that's voted on at the final we need prior to. If not, and something other than what's been proposed, then we have to reconvene within and vote on what passed. So if there's some new thing that passed that was not presented and it was passed, we have to reconvene as a board and do it again. So we try to avoid that, and that means that we can have as many proposals as we want. You can put forth, normally we have 6 or 7 that we put on the website and we circulate. So we can put other, and to avoid that problem of meeting again, because then we have to wait 3 days because you have to give 72 hours public notice of a meeting, and it becomes, then we have to circulate it and put it on our website, and then we have to find a venue, which is, all those things are very, very difficult. But And we're supposed to be done by July 1, and that's the other factor.
Okay, so, sorry, can you go over the process for voting again? Either the tenant reps or the owner reps put forth a proposal, which is likely a range, and then the
All
fi-
9 of us vote.
all 9 of us vote
And if it gets 5 votes, it passes.
before the other.
Yes, so
Has-
it's like each motion will be decided in turn.
Oh, okay.
I mean, technically, the first motion, if it passed,
There'd be no more.
you could put a motion forward, but if we don't get to your vote on your motion because something passes before you, your motion would be part of the original record, and you could technically put it forward in the final vote again if you thought you had the votes to get your motion passed.
But by then, it's a single, if you were doing a range, it was, it's a single number, but the final has to be, the final vote's not a range, right, so.
But it's not, I'm sorry. So, go ahead.
When you said that there is, like, if one thing gets 5 votes, are we aware of all, because then.
Yeah, you're
we're aware
voting
of all-
publicly, yeah.
But, it's not like, okay, this is proposal 1, and then you vote, but like you know all the proposals.
No, not at the preliminary, you won't know. At the final, you'll know all the proposals.
Okay.
But at the preliminary, we don't know, other than what you folks discussed
So
prior
There might be
to.
informal conversations amongst people.
To just get a range so that way we cover everything and there's no, okay.
Right, I mean, no matter if you're a tenant or an owner or a public member, you're going to discuss with,
Possible ranges,
where
okay.
other members are, which is fine and legal, as long as you don't meet with more than 5 people in public, you're good to go. But obviously, like anything, you're trying to gain support for a particular proposal, which is fine. You can certainly do that. That's not an issue. So, you just can't meet in a group of 5 people, so it's before or less. But
Wait, sorry, can you explain the can't meet in a group of 5 people again? For example, I've got.
you can't
Of
have a
the-
quorum,
of the-
then it
oh,
becomes a
okay.
public meeting.
So you can meet with tenant reps or landlord reps or anyone in any group that you want, as long as
It's not-
5 of us are not there together. 5 or 4?
Don't invite anybody to your birthday
5.
party.
So we can't,
So you can meet 4, you can meet
Turn your
40.
house into a public.
because if we did meet with 5, then the open meetings law would apply, and we'd
Okay.
be
Then we have
violating the
to-
open meetings
yeah.
law.
Understood.
Alex?
A little confused about the timing and process for coming up with proposals for the ranges of increase.
There really is no timing. The timing is that, the proposal, on May 7th, we're going to hear those proposals. So if you have something in mind that you've already gleaned from all the information, like after today's meeting, we're not going to meet again before the preliminary. So at that point, you've formulated some thoughts of what you would like to put forward, then I don't need to see it. You just put forward that on the 7th. Now, how you want to discuss that with other members, that obviously is up to you. Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is all, so you two count as public members? Is that it?
No, just,
The 4 of us, Andrew has no vote.
I have no vote. I have no vote.
And then Cecilia Hossa is also there's 5 public members. She's out today, she's sick.
And then we're missing 2 owners.
2 tenants.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And then after the public is testifying on the proposals that were discussed like a few minutes prior.
Well, the follow-up meetings will be the public to react to them.
Oh, so there's no public testimony on next?
Nope, it's
Oh,
Oh, no. No, it's simply voting. I'm sorry. Yeah, no.
got it.
the 7th, that's the 7th,
Yeah,
right?
okay,
I would recommend to go back and take a look at the video from last year,
okay.
just to give you guys a sense of how it works. And it was April, I want to say it was April
The lamb leader
26th.
to the
So you
slaughter.
can take a look.
All right, thank you.
Once the meeting gets started, it's, what we do though, is we open the doors at 6, and we try to get everybody, for the most part, in before we start, as, if people are showing up. The board has been gracious enough to wait till most everyone's in, which, again, sort of is up to David, but, and then we'll start the meeting. And then once the meeting gets started, the preliminary votes they depend, they can take 45 minutes. I mean, I don't, so.
So let's say, whatever my turn is, and I say my vote is between this range and this range for 1 year, and between this range and this range for 2 years. do I then give reasons why I'm supposed to give you,
Yeah.
set forth my case? Is that
The
it?
preliminary doesn't, what you're trying to do is not convince, you're trying to convince the other board members at that point. So generally, there's a statement, certainly by the tenant and the owner side, trying to make their case, right? This is what we, and this is why we feel like this proposal should be adopted. Public members are welcome to do that as well. But there's no, it's only the final vote that sort of has an explanatory statement and a statement of reason. This is just preliminary. It, you know, you're welcome to make a statement, and generally, you know, the owners and the tenants do.
Would we make one statement together?
Generally, but you're welcome to comment. I mean, you know, you're welcome to add. I mean, it's different over the years. Sometimes both members will chime in and give a, you know, a little bit of a speech, reasons why they're doing what they're doing. It's, you know, you talk among yourselves and see how you want to handle it, kind of thing.
Sometimes you can't speak.
So just in the 2 years that I've been on it, it's pretty formalistic, the preliminary and the final vote, like, as opposed to this informal conversation we're having now. Those two votes are more formalistic as a general rule.
You're going to read this, he
Yeah.
will read this verbatim, every word.
Yeah.
And then the first presentation will go, everybody will vote, I think people vote in alphabetical order.
Alphabetically.
People vote in alphabetical order, so you see your last name, so you know where you're being alphabetical voting.
You can pass the first time
You
around.
can pass if you want to see how other
And then we'll
people
go back,
vote,
and we'll go back to you.
Which happened last year.
which happened last year.
And then you can decide to vote. You can vote yes, no,
I'll
or,
explain that later.
So a lot of it.
abstain. You can abstain, but if you at least have to abstain. You can pass the first time, and then we'll go back to you, but then you have to make a decision, yes, no, or
So
abstain.
could you abstain to hear all the proposals?
No, because one could pass before you would hear them all.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
you could, but it'd only be if all of them
Right,
fail.
right.
Till the last one.
I mean, I can't remember the last time we reconsidered a proposal. I don't, I've been here since 92,
Okay.
and I don't know if there's ever been a time that we went back to a proposal. I mean, usually,
My sense is that everyone knows in advance the proposals that will be made at the meeting. So there's no lack of information.
it's not going to be it's not going to be a surprise.
Okay, all right.
Most likely, I mean. you know.
Yeah, it could be.
It could be, but,
It would be a bad
I
strategy
mean,
to surprise the
it's a
board.
bad strategy to just come forward with
But
it.
the proposals are not out on the floor first, they come
No.
at one at a time.
One at a time.
So the point is to have communication at least one to another to know where.
Yeah, where
your
people
mindsets
stand,
at.
yeah, like, yeah, which,
I got it.
yeah. Again, I suggest the video for those who are out there. Yeah, I think if we should probably break for lunch, give everybody a break. We have lunch here, Brian?
Right.
It's in the room, I think it's in the back room.
Yeah, and then, so let's are we adjourning, or are we?
We're adjourning, yes.
Let's adjourn. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
No, we're not adjourning.
Oh,
We're
we're
just
not.
taking recess.
Oh, we're taking a recess.
Recess till 1 o'clock.
So,
We're not adjourning. No, recess.
Hitting the gavel, we're taking a recess.
Okay, and reconvening at 1.